industry that seldom make headlines. There are no cameras. There are no breaking news banners. Just a silent injustice that seeps into the core of a single human being. It's one of those moments. Hatred grinned instead of shouting. Racism did not always wear a uniform. Instead, it used regulations, rituals, expectations, and silence. And in the middle of it stood one man, marked long before he realized why. He was never supposed to be seen, not celebrated, not protected. From the moment he began to walk, the world had already decided how far he could go. Before he said anything, others had already reached a conclusion about the hue of his skin. The doors closed without slamming. Opportunities disappeared without explanation. Suspicion followed him into rooms he had full permission to access. Nonetheless, something about him refused to bend. Racism does not necessarily manifest as violence. Sometimes it manifests as neglect, as decreased expectations, as a continual reminder that no matter how hard you try, you will always be perceived as inferior. It suggests that your dreams are unrealistic, your ambition is perilous, your presence is inconvenient. Over time, that whisper becomes louder than any scream. This man felt it everywhere, in the way eyes lingered for too long, in the way authority scrutinized him more closely than others. When success occurred, it was viewed as a mistake that needed to be corrected. He quickly discovered that greatness would not protect him. Obedience wouldn't save him. Silence would not protect him. What exacerbated the situation was not only the hostility but the inconsistency. Because when the world rejected him, something unseen seemed to propel him ahead. When he should have broken, he persevered. When he should have disappeared, he moved forward. When logic demanded capitulation, his spirit insisted on standing. Not too loud, not necessarily, but immovable. Some would later claim it was luck. Others might call it a coincidence. But those who paid attention knew better. There was a burden on his life, a pressure. Every trial seemed to be intended to reveal something terrifyingly resilient rather than to crush him. Racism attempted to deprive him of dignity. It attempted to destroy his worth by repetition. It attempted to make him accept the falsehood that he was alone. However, seclusion did not empty him. It sharpened him. Each injustice was like a stone on his back. Each insult became a lesson in moderation. Each closed door demonstrated that the system was never designed for him to win. And still, he walked onward, not because he was unaware of the hostility, but because he refused to let hatred write his tale. This is what the world never realizes about individuals it seeks to destroy. Pressure does not necessarily cause collapse. It can sometimes lead to clarity. Sometimes it reveals the harshness of the system rather than the victim's frailty. And occasionally it awakens something ancient, something incomprehensible. There are people who appear to have been selected, not because life is simple for them, but because it tests them brutally precisely. As if every adversity is asking the same question, will you disappear or stay? Racism predicted he to shrink, to internalize contempt, to bear disgrace that was never his. It is expected to be tiredness, self-doubt, anger that is self-destructive. It didn't anticipate perseverance without bitterness, strength without spectacles, faith without applause, and this is when the story takes a nasty turn. Because the longer he endured, the more dangerous he became to the narrative that tormented him. A man who has survived prejudice without losing his soul poses a threat. A man who rises without animosity cannot be restrained. A man who knows his worth without permission destabilizes entire institutions based on supremacy, which exacerbates the strain. That's when the exams intensified. Because prejudice does not tolerate resiliency. It intensifies. It tightens. It seeks a breaking point, and it believes it has found one. What follows reveals not just the savagery of racism, but also its ultimate frailty. When anger met something it couldn't destroy, it revealed the truth. Was this man simply stubborn, or was he picked for something the world couldn't silence? His name was Elias Carter, and he grew up on the southern outskirts of Birmingham, Alabama, where history lingered in the streets like a stubborn shadow. The city appeared modern on the outside. New buildings, fresh paint, hopeful slogans, but beneath, old divisions quietly chose who belonged and who had to prove it. Elias lived an unremarkable life to anybody passing by. Early mornings, long workdays, evenings are spent in calm fatigue. He wasn't loud. He was not reckless. He did not want problems or attention. He thought almost defiantly that if he did everything correctly, the world would finally meet him halfway. From a young age, he learned to put discipline ahead of comfort. Responsibility comes before reward. His home instilled in him order, faith, and the conviction that character was more important than recognition. He handled those lessons with care, as if they were precious, because the world outside those walls treated them as invisible. Elias worked more than most people around him, not for acclaim, but because effort seemed like protection. Excellence became his armor. Preparation became his habit. He arrived early, stayed late, and talked only as necessary. Even when things went well, something felt odd. Compliments came as a surprise. Success came with distrust. As if his progress needed to be explained. He spotted patterns before he understood them, how mistakes stuck with him longer than others, how quickly authorities seemed to doubt him, how quiet was frequently construed as guilt, whereas confidence was considered arrogance. These weren't big events, just subtle, recurring reminders that the rules shifted around him. Nonetheless, Elias believed in fairness, or at least he wanted to. He believed that systems could be navigated, that patience would eventually pay off, that dignity might withstand discrimination. He convinced himself that resilience was sufficient. In his quiet moments, he imagined a future based on stability, a life in which effort led to opportunity, where regard was mutual and not conditional. These were not lavish dreams, rather they were simple. Safety, recognition, the freedom to exist without being judged. However, underlying that hope was a continual tension he rarely mentioned, a sense that no matter how carefully he moved, the earth underneath him was unstable. That one incorrect interpretation, one mistaken assumption, and one prejudiced choice may erase years of discipline. The warning flags were there, subtle at first. A warning cloaked in politeness, a prolonged hesitation, an opportunity that was lost without explanation. Each moment seemed trivial. Together they sent a silent message: you are being observed more intently than you realize. Elias recognized it, but chose caution over reaction. He believed that being calm was a sign of strength, that silent endurance was a sign of maturity. He didn't realize that in some situations, quiet is misinterpreted for consent. As his life fell into routine, the pressure gradually increased. Not suddenly, not forcefully, but methodically. Without realizing it, Elias was on the verge of a turning point where his character would be challenged beyond anything he could have prepared for. It happened gradually, measured, deliberate, almost courteous. What started as a mild imbalance became a routine impediment. Elias sensed that the expectations around him were subtly changing. The bar was raised. The margins of error disappeared. Where others were corrected, he was documented. Where others were cautioned, he was punished. The same action resulted in different outcomes, and no one discussed it openly. Work became a maze of unseen laws. Instructions arrived incomplete, and responsibility was assigned when outcomes failed. His performance reports became colder, full of ambiguous wording that appeared professional but had serious ramifications. Concern, tone, and fit replaced explicit metrics. He was no longer judged solely on results, but on perception, an ever-changing standard he could never fully meet. Outside those walls, the stress followed him. Elias felt it in public settings when neutrality was threatened. Strangers appraised him before he talked. Authority figures lingered for a second too long, their hands closer to radios than required. The burden was not dread but attentiveness, the fatigue of continually assessing himself, knowing that one miscommunication may spiral beyond repair. What made it worse was the isolation. When Elias attempted to explain what he was feeling, the replies were expected. Some people rejected it as sensitive. Others framed it as a coincidence. A few suggested thanks, implying that perseverance itself was an opportunity. Slowly he realized that racism feeds not only on hatred but also on unbelief. The strain grew, and responsibilities expanded without authority. Accountability increased in the absence of support. Elias was handed the most demanding assignments, the most scrutinized roles, and the least forgiving deadlines. Success won him silence. Any delay aroused suspicion. It became evident that failure was unavoidable and perhaps desirable. He started documenting everything, not because he desired conflict, but because he sensed something closing in. Emails, timestamps, procedures. In an environment where preconceptions trumped truth, facts became his only line of defense. However, even evidence did not ensure protection. It just postponed the repercussions. The first significant incident occurred unexpectedly. A decision made above him failed publicly, and blame needed to be assigned. Elias was named without explanation. The narrative came together quickly, clean, concise, and credible to those who already expected it. His reputation sank beneath the weight of insinuation. No accusation was made openly, but the damage spread quicker than clarity could. He was relieved of his duties temporarily, and access was restricted. Trust was revoked. Colleagues avoided eye contact. Some are out of dread. Others were relieved that the emphasis had turned away from them. Elias stood in a familiar space that suddenly felt foreign, recognizing that belonging had always been conditional. Despite this, he stayed collected. This composure unnerved people. Racism frequently demands a reaction: anger, disobedience, or collapse. Elias provided none of it. He answered with moderation, clarity, and documentation. The refusal to unravel disturbed the unstated plot. As a result, the inspection became more intense, and another incident occurred. Then another. Each is modest on the surface, yet heavier in significance. A missed invitation. A reassignment is portrayed as development. The record was quietly amended. Each act alone could be disregarded. Together they created a pattern that was too deliberate to ignore. The environment became hostile in subtler ways. When he entered a room, the conversations halted. Decisions were made without him. Authority was exercised around him, not within him. He was present but excluded, visible but unheard. Despite the pressure, something else was happening. Elias was changing. The humiliation had peeled away illusions. The unfairness emphasized his ideals. He stopped seeking approbation and concentrated on the truth. He ceased explaining himself to those who were determined to misunderstand. His tolerance hardened into resolution. Not loud, not performative, but total. This commitment became problematic since institutions based on imbalance rely on obedience rather than conscience. And Elias, without raising his voice, had ceased believing the lie. That was when the stakes soared above reputation. An accusation surfaced, this one formal, documented, and irreversible if left unaddressed. It threatened not just his career, but possibly his liberty. The weight settled in his chest like gravity itself. Years of quiet resistance had led him here, and for the first time Elias understood the intention. This wasn't about correction. This wasn't about policy. This was about removal. As the walls closed in, the question became whether survival would cost him everything he believed in. Not too loud, not particularly dramatic, just official enough to alter everything. A single paper turned years of discipline, temperance, and integrity into a story of guilt. It talked with authority. It had implications, and it was anticipated that Elias would not be able to withstand the weight. What followed was silence rather than commotion. Access was fully revoked. His name has vanished from systems he formerly helped manage. His life's regularity disintegrated in a single day, leaving him with uncertainty that seemed physical. Outside, everything went on as usual. Inside, everything was unraveling. This was the moment prejudice had been waiting for. When isolation becomes terrible, when doubt whispers louder than truth, when fatigue tempts you to succumb, Elias was expected to react angrily, desperately, and predictably. He was supposed to fulfill every preconception about him, but he did not. Instead, he stood still in the storm. He went through every record he had kept, each timestamp, every contradiction. Every quiet decision had led up to this point. The evidence painted a story that entirely contradicted the accusation, but proof alone had never been the true barrier. The real barrier was belief that someone like him could be harmed so severely, belief that the system could fail so plainly, belief that racism could still work in such an efficient, clean, and unobtrusive manner. The process continued without him. Reviews were undertaken, conclusions were drafted, the outcome seemed predetermined, and then something unexpected happened. A contradiction emerged, however small at first. A date that did not match, a method which had not been followed. A signature was missing when it should have been unquestionable. One detail led to another. The narrative began to fracture, not because Elias required it, but because truth resists burial. Pressure shifted, and many who had been watching silently became nervous. Those who profited from his removal were cautious. The mechanism, which was supposed to move smoothly, began to pause, and hesitancy revealed weakness. When the final evaluation arrived, the accusation crumbled under its own weight, not overturned with apologies, not remedied with responsibility, simply undone. The wording softened. The lines of responsibility blurred. The blunder was acknowledged without admission, and Elias was cleared. However, clearance did not restore what had been taken. He stood on the verge of vindication, recognizing that something permanent had happened. Racism had not destroyed him, but it had revealed itself thoroughly. And in doing so, it had permanently altered him. The question was no longer whether he would survive, but rather what survival now required. Resolution and impact. Elias's life did not return to normal. Clearance did not bring relief. It brought clarity. The system that accused him never fully rectified itself. There were no public acknowledgments, no reckoning. Just a quiet assumption that he would be grateful and move on. But something fundamental had changed. He realized that survival did not equate to success. That being proven correct did not undo the damage of being doubted. Racism did not need to damage his physique to injure him. It sought his sense of belonging, trust, and readiness to believe in justice. In many ways, it succeeded. Elias took a different road forward, not driven by bitterness, but by awareness. He became methodical with his energies and cautious with his presence. He stopped shrinking so that others could be comfortable. He stopped confusing endurance with obligation. His dignity was no longer debatable. The consequences of what had happened to him could not be restrained. Others witnessed it. Some saw themselves in his story. Others were compelled to confront systems that they had never questioned. His quiet perseverance became a mirror, reflecting both the pain of racism and the cost of ignoring it. Racism rarely makes itself known when it fails. It merely retreats, awaiting the next opportunity, stillness, or assumption. But it had erred this time. It had shown its mechanics too clearly, and exposure alters everything. Elias remained standing, not untouched, but undamaged. His survival was hardly a miracle. It was gained via awareness, discipline, and a steadfast unwillingness to believe a falsehood about his worth. He did not choose to become a symbol, but his perseverance had far-reaching consequences. This is not an unusual story. It is silently repeated daily in companies, organizations, and communities all throughout the world. Most cases are never resolved. Most people never see accountability. Stories like this pose a threat to the systems that perpetuate racism. When a person overcomes racism without losing their humanity, the focus shifts from the victim to the world that attempted to erase them. How many Elias exist today? And how many systems continue to rely on silence to complete the job?